Welcome to another episode of Study Sesh, broadcasting straight from Boston City campus. Once again, we're doing a deep dive into the intricacies of student life, learning outcomes, everything in between. So today we're looking at the kinds of contextual challenges that leaders face. We're in this ever-evolving landscape of teams and organizations, and whether you're leading a group project, maybe you're running a student organization, or even if you're dreaming of heading up a Fortune 500 company one day, today's episode is going to be super useful. It's going to be packed with insights, a bit of fun, maybe even a few surprises. And to get our heads around leadership, we're going on a bit of an oceanic adventure today. We're going to try to work out how we can navigate and sail through the complex world of leadership in the 21st century. We're talking about leadership, but I want you to imagine being in charge of an actual ship during this conversation. You're the captain, sailing this huge ocean that has good weather and bad weather. Inevitably, there's this host of unexpected and sometimes quite salty challenges that are going to come your way. You've got to steer your vessel, you've got to lead your sailing crew through choppy waters against strong headwinds, dodging whirlpools and coral reefs, making sure you don't collide with other ships. You get the point, right? The thing is, in business, your crew is looking up to you as you face the Bermuda Triangle, let's say, of economic uncertainty on one hand, workforce diversity on another, and even the quest for work-life balance on the third. And at the end of the day, it's down to you and the decisions you make, whether your business ship stays afloat, whether you get to the place you're sailing to, how comfortable the journey is for your crew, and how happy your onboard guests are, as in your customers. That's the reality and the heart of leadership, this idea of if it's going to be, it's up to me. And to unpack the different types of challenges that we're going to face as leaders, we're talking to Leandre van Heerden today. She's an expert on all things leadership and is going to help us navigate this strange and wonderful ocean, no matter the weather. Welcome, Leandre.
Thank you. Hi, Camilla. Yes, it's a privilege to be here and to unpack this topic with you today. Thanks for having me.
Leandre, just to kick us off, can you introduce us to a theory or a principle of leadership that you find most useful in today's world? Something maybe that we can all implement on a daily basis, even if we're not leaders ourselves. I'm thinking here, I suppose, of a North Star that we can navigate using.
Firstly, it is self-leadership. I'm a big proponent of self-leadership and the fact that you have to be ready as a person before you can even worry about leading others. It starts by leading yourself. That's the first one. The second one, specifically with a focus on the world we live in today, is adaptability. The element of a leader being adaptable, being flexible, and especially teaching and leading others to do the same.
Let's talk first then about self-leadership. It is a crucial thing for us to keep in mind. Often, as we start off in leadership, it is just managing ourselves or even a small team. I'm assuming that emotional intelligence plays a huge role in effective leadership, Leandre, even if it is just of ourselves. Am I correct there?
Absolutely. I have to say, I really like the example that you used about the ship. And if there is one thing that is important for a captain when he's on that ship, especially in the storms of the ocean, is for him to remain calm and collected during that time, regardless of the way that he feels. And I think it's such an important element is for a leader to have the ability to show emotion, because that allows people to relate to the leader, but most importantly, to control that emotion, because that's going to enable him to make the right decisions, lead people, in the direction of a solution and not lead them straight into an iceberg, if I can, stick to the metaphor. So emotional intelligence is actually the epicenter, if I may say, of self-leadership. It's about self-awareness. It's about understanding how you process things and how that separates you from people as an individual and as a leader.
But the reality is, Leandre, that most of us are not going to start off our leadership journeys sailing an enormous cruise ship, for instance, right? We're probably going to be in a little rubber dinghy if we're lucky, as a first-time manager in a small team, maybe. That's definitely the way it started for me. And often we get into these situations not necessarily prepared to lead. Do you have any practical tips right up front for someone who's being called on, I suppose, to lead for the first time?
I would mention, if I can sort of put it in a diagram, I'd start with the first two factors, which is you, and then it's the team. And the element of you is firstly figuring out what you want to achieve as a leader and who you want to be as a leader. Even if you're the operations manager of a small logistics company, or if you're the CEO of a large banking corporation, whatever it is, once you step into that position, you first need to know, who am I and what do I want to achieve as a leader? Then the element of your team is you need to know, who are my team members? What do they want to achieve? What do they need from me? What can I give to them? So, I actually read a book quite a while ago by John Maxwell, and this book says good leaders, or the title of the book is Good Leaders Ask Great Questions. And do you know what? I read that book and I've never in my life really until that moment understood the value of asking questions. So when you step into that position to steer a ship, or to sit in the front and just row a boat, if that's whatever the situation is, it's important that you start asking the questions, because people are going to come to you with questions too. So to be proactive and preempt what your team needs is essential, but then also understand that in order for you to answer those questions effectively, efficiently, would require you to know who you are as the leader too.
Now, Leandre, as we are sailing our leadership from port to port, if I can put it like that, we're constantly having to work with people who aren't like us, right? They don't work in the same place as us necessarily. They have different views on the world. We have to lead them effectively, no matter all those challenges. And the reality is, these days, we're all working remotely and online, and that brings its own challenges. How do leaders navigate these challenges of remote work with their teams? Any idea of strategies that have proven successful, or could help in working with a distributed workforce?
So, that is a very good question. I actually come from a background where the company I used to work for did not make use of this at all. So, firstly, I would like to say that in times like today, I think it's essential to apply remote work. It's very important, because that adds to the element of work-life balance. So I don't want to stray from the question, but that is something to consider if you have a company that is scared to make use of remote working. I personally believe it'll actually increase the dynamic of your work team. So that is something to consider. But what I've learned and what I've seen so far from people who do it is, it's important to engage with your team daily. Whether you're the team member or you're the team leader, it is important to have that engagement, to have open communication. It's the biggest cliche there is, but it's because it's so important to have open communication with your team and to engage with them at all times, because you don't have that face to face anymore, but we still need to get together to know where we're going. So as much as you cannot walk into a person's office, make use of the different tools that you have. You and I are communicating via Zoom, or there are still very simple methods to communicate with one another. And I think that is the biggest thing for me, is to ensure that you follow effective communication methods apart from all of the other tactics that are accessible.
Because the reality is that as a leader, essentially what you're doing, especially with a workforce that is distributed, is you're trying to manage a global village. And To me, that's got to sometimes feel like you're trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded or something like that. You've got people who have different cultures, different worldviews, different experiences in life. What's the best advice that you've encountered for leaders who are trying to bridge cultural divides as well as geographic ones?
That's a good question. So I'd actually like to use an example. In the past, McDonald's and KFC both entered the market of China. And both of these chains are already well known, they're already well established. I'm pretty sure any person you speak to love them. But for some reason, McDonald's did not initially succeed as well as KFC did. Now, apart from organizational strategies and structures and technical aspects, it came down to the most important element, which is that KFC considered their market, which is culturally different compared to the origin of KFC. So KFC applied those and considered the culture and applied those cultural aspects in the KFC within China. And that put them leaps and bounds beyond McDonald's, because McDonald's refused to change their menu for the market in China. So that is a big one, is consider the market that you're in, and you have to change your product or your leadership style based on that culture. There are companies that failed miserably in this. For example, Starbucks, they tried the market of Australia, and the Australians did not take well to it. Firstly, it was way too commercialized for them. And they also felt that it's ridiculous to pay that much for coffee. So Starbucks did not succeed in Australia. So that's what it is to me, is consider the culture that you're in and have the ability to adapt in that culture. So that in itself requires adaptability and flexibility of the leader.
And of course, we're looking at this through a customer lens, but there's also the internal bridging of those divides, right? I mean, if we go back to the ship analogy, we wanted a host of different crew members on board who all have their own specialities, who can do the different tasks we need them to. But the thing is, this means we often work with people who are very unlike us, right? But as the captain, we need to make sure everyone feels like they're part of the team, that we're all sailing in the same direction, that we're all doing it for the same reason. So what to you is the secret to fostering that kind of unity and dynamism within such a team? Any tips for bringing and keeping your crew together every day?
Yes, so this is, I would almost say the leader has to act as the bridge in this area. You have to be able to bridge the gap between the differences in your employees or your workforce. It's I first want to say it's not something to be ignored. It is something that you have to consider, especially because I think even as the technology and economies are evolving, people are evolving as well. We're seeing new religions created. We see new beliefs created, new cultures that come up nowadays as well. Some cultures that might not have necessarily existed 10, 50 years ago. So it's important that the leader bridges that gap by highlighting the differences that there are. And this might actually make leaders uncomfortable, because that means you need to sit your people down and actually ask them, what makes you different? And that might create conflict. But I think a good leader would use that conflict as a tool and actually create a good team dynamic. So for example, if I had to now practically do this, the first thing I would do is build a relationship with each employee and actually consider what that employee brings to the table based on their culture. And it's also a sensitive area, because I cannot point out that that person is different because of their culture. That person might then in the end feel that you're picking on their culture, or you're deliberately pointing out that they're different than the rest. So it's a very technical thing, a very sensitive thing. And I've actually, if I may say, a company that's very successful in this is Google, because they're a globalized organization, but they have managed to create an internal workforce that where the culture reinvents itself constantly, because that is in itself already the culture, is the fact that people understand their differences. So it takes me back to the first thing that I say. People need to communicate what it is that makes them different. And the leader then needs to step in as the bridge to help them find a way to make those differences work together.
Leandre, you mentioned Google. I mean, Google's one of the tech giants of the world. And, I think it would be remiss of us not to talk about the impact of technology on leadership. I mean, our new digital world is changing so quickly. And we have technology coming out that can really impact an organization almost out of the blue. It's a bit like if you're sailing along very happily, you can be hit by a hurricane the next moment, something huge and powerful and potentially dangerous. And of course, it's our job as leaders to sail into and then through the hurricane. So I suppose with technology really evolving faster, faster than a speeding bullet, it feels like, how can leaders stay ahead without getting tech whiplash?
That's a good question. I like that. I actually had a conversation with someone the other day where we were discussing that technology is not only changing and evolving, but it's evolving at a faster pace. So, how do you keep up? And it's essential that organizations make use of fast paced technology and fast paced systems to keep up. So, the example that I'd like to give is Nike. I mean, personally, without being too biased, I am a massive Nike fan. I mean, you would open my cupboard now and you'd find a couple of sneakers in there. I'm not gonna lie. And they're a great example of utilizing technology to expand their market and to expand innovation. And a very cool thing that they did is the fact that they allow customers to come into store and you can almost try on a digitalized version of the shoe. They also allow people to design their own shoes online. So this, it allowed them to not only gain more customers, but engage with customers in a much deeper way. And this shows customers that the organization is actually keeping up. They're innovative, they're creative, and that draws customers. That also shows employees because you can actually imagine you're an employee in Nike and you have no digital background, but now they're saying, okay, this is the direction we're going. If there must have been some sort of friction in the organization, that's a whole topic by itself. But they took this step, and instead of straying away from it like some companies have in the past, they actually took this and made a success of it by being innovative, by the word that we would use in today's time is digital innovation or digitalization, because you can't ignore it anymore. If your organization is not making use and grasping the opportunity of technology, you're going to fall pretty far behind. That's how I see it. So in my opinion, I'm worried for companies who say, no, we're going to stick to traditional methods. I attended a lecture once where the person said companies who are not hybrid or who are not making use of and stepping into the fourth industrial revolution are going to fall miserably behind.
Yeah, and what you're talking about there, Leandre, I think is change. Yeah, innovation is all about change, but the reality is the people really like change all that much. I mean, sometimes if you go back to the ship, you're out at sea, you've got to make a decision as the captain to change course. Maybe you're wanting to sail around a potential storm, or you've run out of supplies earlier than expected. Maybe you just want to see something new. Your crew is potentially going to be resistant to that. And, I think often like leading change, in my experience, can be a lot like trying to teach an old dog new tricks, right? Strategies for getting everyone on board and excited about change that we need to speak about?
So I read a very interesting book that touched on this topic. And they mentioned the fact that you need to once again communicate the change to people. And obviously at first, like you said, not everyone is going to be on board, because people, you said it in such a beautiful way. Change means that I have to give up something. I'm going to lose something by having to change, and that's how people feel. So if that's how people feel, then that means they have to see, what am I going to gain by making this change? And that is what a leader needs to show them. You can obviously use very practical ways, I can say, to initiate change or to encourage it by incentives and that. But I feel like it's a much deeper thing. There's much more than just putting a check in front of somebody saying, okay, here's more money if you let me change the company. It's much more than that. You want people to be invested. So to get them to be invested is to show them your vision. Share that vision, because once people see that there is actually something to gain from this, that is when they buy into the vision. And lastly, what he said is there will always be a couple of people who you'd never be able to get on board. So cut your losses. And, you know, personally, that it's hard for me to accept. I don't like the cut your losses. I'm the type of person who likes to keep everybody happy, you know, but it's not going to work. So I think the sooner I learn that, the better. And especially stepping into bigger leadership positions, you're going to have to let some people go. I'm not talking about firing them. I'm talking about respect them and say, this is what it is. We're gonna implement the change. And if we're not on board, I'm pretty sure you'll be happier somewhere else. Because if you, as the leader, do not stick to your ground, people are going to struggle to buy into the vision too, because they're going to think, well, if you change the second we oppose it, then how valuable is this really? How good is this change really going to be for us? But the more the leader himself believes in the change that he's applying, the more people will believe in it too.
Well, Leandre, thank you so much for helping us navigate these choppy waters. We've sailed to all sorts of interesting destinations today, everything from talking about this global village that we are having to navigate through and help others navigate through, the melting pot of cultures, this tech hurricane that's coming for us all, especially in the form of AI, the balancing acts we need to strike as leaders, you know, change champions that we need to be, making sure that our crew is comfortable with this. You've done a stellar job. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Camilla.
So everyone, remember, you might not be at the helm of that enormous cruise ship yet, but you are in charge of your own ship. Lead yourself before leading others, and above all, just stay curious about what the world has to offer and what you have to offer the world.